Good morning from the High Grounds podcast, and welcome back to another morning minute meditation. Thank you so much for joining me. I want to go to the book of Galatians, chapter 6, and verse number 2. The Bible said, "Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." Now, most of the time when we read this verse, we think about this burden representing a spiritual load, a trial, or some sort of suffering that a fellow believer is going through, and that it's our responsibility to encourage them, to help them along through their trial. And even though I think that's a great Bible principle, you go back to verse 1 and you realize the context of this verse is not just a spiritual trial, but it's someone who has fallen into sin. Paul uses the words overtaken in a fault, someone who has given in to temptation. And in these verses, Paul outlines our responsibility as a believer in dealing with this individual. He says, first of all, we have a responsibility to be spiritual, ye which are spiritual, in verse 1. That's someone who's not operating in the motives and the power of the flesh, but someone who is influenced and under the power of the Spirit. He also says we have a responsibility to be sincere. He said to restore such a one. Our motive in getting involved in the sin of a fellow believer should always be to see them restored to the place they were before that sin. He also gives us responsibility to be soft. He used the word meekness. He said, in meekness. That should be the spirit in which we deal with them. But then the verse that I just quoted, he gives us the responsibility of sharing. Now, I don't mind as much to share in someone's suffering or their trial, but he's talking about sharing in someone's sin. You know, just naturally speaking, if you're going to bear the burden of someone else, then you allow yourself to become connected with them and to get under that burden and to take the weight of that burden and to try to lighten that load and to help them along. And, you know, sometimes our attitude toward someone else who's fallen into sin is to stay away from them, or we'll stay on our spiritual pedestal and look down at the area that they're in. But Paul said, bear the burden. Get down there with them. Not that we get involved in their sin, but get underneath that load that they're carrying. Let yourself be subjected to that hurt and everything that they're experiencing in their failure, and try to lift them back up so that they can go on for the glory and the honor of God. I hope maybe that'll give you something to think about today. Thank you for joining me, and we'll see you soon on the High Grounds podcast.